Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. Alfa King, the Wolf King of France. The forest was a cathedral of ancient oaks and whispering secrets, and Elise Beaumont was its most devoted acolyte. She moved through the dappled shadows of the French countryside not as an intruder, but as a part of its very essence, her basket laden with moss, yarrow, and the deep purple monkshood she handled with reverent care. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and impending rain, a perfume she knew better than any courtier knew their cologne. Here, far from the gilded cage of Versailles, she was free. Here she was whole. It was this intimate knowledge of the woods that led her to the dying man. The metallic tang of blood hit her nostrils a moment before she saw the dark stain spreading through the ferns. A nobleman, by the look of his ruined velvet coat, lay crumpled at the base of a gnarled willow, his face ashen. The gash on his thigh was deep, a savage tear that spoke of claws and fangs far larger than any wolf native to these woods. The other villagers would have crossed themselves and hurried on, whispering of demons and cursed hunts. Elise knelt. Her hands, small and capable, did not tremble. She worked with a swift, sure grace, cleansing the wound with a pungent tincture, stitching the ravaged flesh with a bone needle and thread made from sinew. She packed it with a poultice of honey and crushed yarrow, her touch a silent prayer to the life force that thrummed through all things. As she tied the final bandage, torn from her own petticoat, her fingers brushed against the cold metal of a signet ring on the man's hand. A wolf's head carved in onyx, crowned with a single tiny diamond. A shiver entirely separate from the forest chill traced a path down her spine. She did not see the pair of golden eyes watching her from the deep shadows of the trees. The Sun King was dead. Long live the Wolf King. In the Hall of Mirrors at the Château de Montclair, a palace of such staggering opulence it made Versailles look provincial, King Adrien de Montclair stood before his court. 1,000 candles flickered, their flames multiplied to infinity in the vast silvered glass, each one capturing a fragment of the king's formidable presence. He was elegance personified, from the severe line of his jaw to the effortless drape of his midnight blue brocade coat. His hair, the color of winter ash, was tied back, revealing a face of such brutal classical beauty that it silenced rooms. But his eyes were the secret, the color of a storm-racked sky. They held a stillness that was profoundly unnerving. They were the eyes of a predator who had learned to wear silk. The business of France does not pause for grief. His voice rang out, clear and resonant, a blade of sound in the hushed hall. It evolves. It strengthens. He spoke of tariffs and treaties, his intellect as sharp as a razor, his will an almost physical force that bent the assembled nobility to its whim. They adored him, feared him, coveted him. They saw the perfect monarch. They did not see the beast that paced just beneath his skin, a creature of muscle and moonlight howling to be set free. Later, in the stark solitude of his private chambers, the mask cracked. Adrien braced his hands on the cold marble of his fireplace, his knuckles white. The moon, a sliver of silver in the indigo twilight, called to the blood in his veins. The Lupin curse, the legacy of his ancient bloodline, was a constant ache in his bones, a wild drumbeat beneath the civilized waltz of his reign. He was the last of the royal wolves who had guided France from the shadows for a millennium. The weight of that solitude was a crown heavier than any made of gold. A discreet cough announced his first minister, Valerius. The man was a serpent in human skin, his loyalty a fluid thing, measured in favors and fear. "Your Majesty," Valerius began, his voice a silken murmur, "a curious report from the province of Auvergne. The Comte de Luneville was set upon by a creature. His men were slaughtered. He alone survived, thanks to the intervention of a peasant girl. A healer." Adrien did not turn. "And why does this concern me? Peasants have their uses." The Comte was insistent, "Sire. He said the girl her touch was unnaturally cool, that when she laid her hands upon him, a strange symbol on her wrist seemed to glow with a soft silvery light, a crescent moon cradling a single star." Adrien went utterly still. The air in the room grew thick, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with politics. He turned slowly, his stormy eyes pinning Valerius in place. "The mark of the moon goddess," Adrien breathed, the words a near-silent growl. "A sign from their oldest legends, a sign of blessing, or of annihilation. Feared by his kind for generations, a myth made flesh. Bring her to me," the king commanded, his voice low and terrible. "I would look upon this healer." Elise's world had shrunk to the back of a jolting carriage, the likes of which she had never seen. It was lined with velvet, the scent of citrus and male perfume clinging to the air, a constant, cloying reminder of the life she had been torn from. The man who had come for her, the Comte de Luneville, had been effusively grateful, his eyes holding a strange, feverish awe whenever they fell upon her. "The king himself wishes to thank you, my dear," he had said, his gaze lingering on the plain linen band she now wore to cover the mark on her inner wrist, a mark she had hidden her entire life on her mother's frantic, dying insistence. "Never let them see, Elise. Never. The wolves will come for you." The wolves? She had thought it an old wives' tale. The carriage passed through gilded gates and Montclair rose before her, a sprawling confection of pale stone and countless windows, a monument to impossible power. It was not beautiful to her. It was a cage of a different kind, its grandeur a weapon meant to intimidate. She was led through corridors that echoed with the whispers of silk and conspiracy, past courtiers who stared with the cold, assessing eyes of jewelers appraising a flawed gem. She was given a small chamber in a distant wing, a room that was doubtless meant for a lowly servant but to her felt cavernous and cold. That night, as a half-moon rose over the formal gardens, a restlessness seized her. Slipping from her room, she found her way to the library. It was a vast circular room, its domed ceiling painted with scenes of mythological hunts. Books climbed to the heavens, their leather spines smelling of wisdom and decay. And in the center of the room, standing before the massive, cold fireplace, was a man. He was turned away from her, studying a colossal tapestry depicting a wolf with a pelt of silver thread, its eyes fierce and intelligent. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and even in his stillness, he radiated an authority that made the air hum. He must have heard her intake of breath, for he turned. Elise's heart stopped. It was the king. She had never seen him, but she knew. It was in the impossible grace of his movement, the sheer, untamed power he contained with such obvious effort. His stormy eyes swept over her, from her simple travel-worn dress to the loose braid of her brown hair. There was no recognition in his gaze, only a flicker of annoyance at the interruption. "Who are you to wander my halls at this hour?" His voice was like dark velvet, laced with frost. She curtsied, her knees trembling. "Elise Beaumont, your Majesty. I was brought from Auvergne." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something else, something sharper, more primal. He took a step toward her, and the space between them seemed to shrink, charged with an energy she could not name. The scent of him, bergamot, old books, and something wild like the forest after a storm washed over her. "The healer," he said, his gaze dropping to the band on her wrist. "The one with the remarkable touch." He closed the distance, his presence overwhelming. He did not touch her, but she felt him everywhere, a heat against her skin. "Remove it," he commanded softly. Terror and a strange, compelling curiosity warred within her. Slowly, her fingers fumbling, she untied the linen band. It fell away, revealing the mark, a perfect crescent moon the color of old silver, and nestled within its curve, a single tiny star. It was a part of her, had been since birth, but here, under his intense scrutiny, it felt alien, powerful. Adrien's breath caught. The legends were true. The mark of Selene, the moon goddess. A sign said to be able to heal a Lupin's soul, or burn it to ash. The beast within him stirred, not with the familiar rage of the curse, but with a profound, unsettling recognition. It was a pull, a gravitational force, as inevitable as the tide. He reached out, his fingers hovering just above her skin. He did not make contact, but a spark, a shock of pure white-hot energy, leapt the tiny space between his fingertip and her mark. Elise gasped, a jolt of sensation arcing through her entire body, a feeling of something ancient and dormant roaring to life. Adrien's eyes flashed, the storm in them turning violent. For a single, heart-stopping moment, the civilized king vanished, and she saw the wolf. She saw the raw, untamed hunger, the wildness, the agony of a 1,000-year curse. He snatched his hand back as if burned. "Leave me," he snarled, the command guttural, barely human. Elise fled, her heart hammering against her ribs, the ghost of his near touch burning on her wrist. She did not know if it was a brand of salvation or a seal of doom. She only knew that her life, her carefully ordered world of herbs and quiet woods, was over. The Wolf King had seen her mark, and in his eyes she had seen the end of everything she knew. In the library, alone, Adrien stared at the tapestry of the silver wolf, his body thrumming with a sensation he had not felt in centuries. Hope and a terror so profound it threatened to shatter him. The woman smelled of wildflowers and destiny, and she was the most dangerous creature ever to set foot in his court. The court of Montclair was a serpent coiled in silk and sunlight. In the days that followed her encounter in the library, Elise was given a new status, one as precarious as walking a razor's edge. She was neither servant nor guest, but a curious specimen placed under the king's protection, a protection that felt more like a gilded leash. She was assigned a maid, a sharp-eyed woman named Claudette whose loyalty was as questionable as her frequent, silent absences, and was provided with gowns of simple but fine wool, a far cry from her homespun dresses, yet marking her as an outsider amidst the court's brilliant silks and laces. Her presence was a spark on tinder. Whispers trailed her like malevolent spirits. "Peasant," which, the king's new pet. She heard the words hissed behind fans and murmured over crystal glasses of wine. They thought her a simpleton who couldn't understand their polished venom. But Elise understood the language of predators and prey, and in this gilded jungle, she was unequivocally the latter. It was Valerius, the first minister, who became her most persistent shadow. He found her one afternoon in a secluded alcove overlooking the manicured gardens, attempting to find a moment's peace. "Mademoiselle Beaumont," he said, his voice a slick, oily thing. "I trust you are finding your accommodations stimulating?" Elise met his gaze, keeping her own neutral. "They are very grand, Minister. Grandeur can be a prison, can it not?" He smiled, a thin, bloodless line. "Our king is a man of particular tastes and deep private sorrows. The Lupin bloodline carries a heavy burden, a certain savagery, they say, that requires careful management." He leaned closer, his scent of ambergris and something faintly metallic making her stomach turn. It would be a tragedy if an innocent, plucked from obscurity, were to become entangled in the darker aspects of our court. If you ever feel unsafe, or simply wish for a friend who understands the complexities of this place, my door is always open. The offer was a spider's invitation into its web. She merely inclined her head. "You are too kind." His eyes narrowed slightly, the friendly mask slipping for a fraction of a second to reveal the calculating predator beneath. "Not at all. We must all look after the king's interests." After he left, Elise felt a chill that had nothing to do with the stone walls. He knew something. He was probing, testing her knowledge of the king's true nature. She was a pawn in a game she didn't understand, and Valerius was moving her across a board she couldn't even see. Her only respite came from an unexpected source. In the royal gardens, she discovered a hidden section, a walled herb garden left to a state of beautiful neglect. Lavender grew in wild purple profusion, and rosemary bushes spilled over cracked flagstones. Here, with the sun on her face and the familiar scents in her nostrils, she could almost breathe. She began tending to it, her hands finding solace in the soil, a small act of rebellion and remembrance. It was here, a week after her arrival, that Adrien found her. She was on her knees, carefully untangling a stubborn weed from around a base of thyme, the rich earth staining her skirts. She didn't hear him approach. He moved with a predator's silence. It was the sudden stillness in the air, the way the birdsong seemed to hush, that made her look up. He stood a few feet away, out of place in his impeccable black and silver, a creature of the night cast into the daytime world of growing things. His gaze was not on her, but on her hands covered in soil. "You are not afraid of getting dirty," he observed, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very ground beneath her. Elise's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. She slowly got to her feet, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dirt can be washed away, Your Majesty. A neglected garden is a slower death." His stormy eyes flickered to hers, and for a moment she saw not the king, but the man from the library, the one haunted by a beast. "You see death in a garden? I see life struggling to survive. It is my calling to aid it where I can." He took a step closer, and the scent of him, that wild forest edge aroma, wreathed around her, intoxicating and terrifying. "And what do you see in me, Mademoiselle Beaumont? A life struggling to survive? Or a death waiting to happen?" The question was a trap, a challenge flung at her feet. She met his gaze, her own unwavering. "I see a man who stands too still, as if movement might shatter the glass box he has built around himself." A muscle ticked in his jaw. No one spoke to him like this. No one dared. He should have been angered. Instead, he felt a jolt of something perilously close to relief. This woman with dirt on her hands and fearlessness in her eyes saw him, truly saw him. His eyes dropped to her wrist, where the silver mark was hidden by her sleeve. "Walk with me," he commanded, but the edge was gone from his voice, replaced by a raw, compelling need. They walked along the gravel paths, the silence between them thick and heavy with unspoken truths. He led her away from the formal parterres and into a denser part of the forest that bordered the palace grounds, a place where the shadows grew long and the air grew cold. "The Lupin curse is not what the stories say," he began, his voice low, as if the trees themselves might be listening. "It is not an affliction of madness, though madness can come. It is a duality, a second soul woven into the first, a heritage of the moon. My ancestors did not see it as a curse, but as a sacred duty. They were the protectors of this land, the silent hunters in the dark who kept greater evils at bay." He stopped, turning to face her. The dappled light through the canopy played across the sharp planes of his face. "But the bloodline has thinned. The power has become volatile. I am the last. When the moon is full, the beast does not simply emerge. It fights to be free every single night. It is a constant war, Elise. A war I am slowly losing." He had used her given name. The intimacy of it stole her breath. "And my mark," she whispered. His gaze was a physical weight. "The mark of Selene. In the oldest texts, it is written that the goddess would send a vessel of her power, a mortal touched by moonlight, a healer who could either temper the wolf's fury or extinguish it forever. You are either the anchor that can steady my soul, or the weapon that can end my line." Before she could respond, a crack of a twig sounded from the undergrowth. Adrien's head snapped up, his entire body coiling with lethal tension. In an instant, the contemplative man was gone, replaced by the primal king. He pushed Elise behind him, his body a shield between her and the unseen threat. From the shadows emerged not a man but a stag, a magnificent, towering beast with a crown of antlers. But there was something wrong with it. Its eyes rolled, showing the whites, and froth dripped from its mouth. A deep guttural growl rumbled in its chest, a sound no herbivore should ever make. "Stay back," Adrien growled, his voice dropping an octave, a gravelly undertone that was not entirely human. The stag lowered its head and charged. Time seemed to slow. Adrien didn't flinch. As the beast thundered toward them, he let out a sound that was half roar, half snarl, a challenge of such pure, alpha dominance that the very air shook. The stag, mere feet from impact, faltered. Its mad eyes cleared for a split second, showing primal fear, and it veered wildly, crashing off into the woods. The silence that followed was deafening. Adrien stood, his chest heaving, his back to her. When he finally turned, his eyes were blazing, the storm within them a hurricane. The beast was right there at the surface, barely contained. "You see," he rasped, the words torn from him. "The corruption spreads. The balance is broken. The forest itself feels the decay of my bloodline." Elise, her heart pounding, took a step toward him. The fear was there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a surge of something else, a profound, aching empathy. She saw his torment, his isolation, the immense weight he carried. Without thinking, driven by an instinct older than reason, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm. The contact was electric. It was not a spark this time, but a conflagration. A wave of heat, of pure white energy, shot from her mark through her fingers and into him. Adrien gasped, his body jolting as if struck by lightning. A low, pained sound escaped his lips, part agony, part ecstasy. The wild fury in his eyes didn't vanish, but it shifted. The chaotic storm calmed, the edges softened. The beast, for the first time in living memory, was not silenced but soothed. He looked down at her small soil-stained hand on his arm, then back up at her face, his expression one of stunned, bewildered awe. The sound of approaching voices, guards drawn by the commotion, shattered the moment. Adrien straightened, the king's mask slamming back into place, but his eyes remained locked on hers, filled with a new, terrifying, and exhilarating wonder. He didn't say a word. He simply turned and strode away, leaving her standing alone in the darkening forest, the phantom warmth of his arm still burning on her palm. She had not extinguished the wolf. She had gentled it, and in doing so, she had bound her fate to his more irrevocably than any chain or command. The game had changed. She was no longer just a pawn. She was becoming the key. And in the shadows of the palace, Valerius watched them return from the forest, his eyes narrowing into calculating slits. The king's interest in the peasant healer was not a passing fancy. It was something far more dangerous. It was a vulnerability. The invitation, delivered by a stone-faced footman, was a single sheet of heavy vellum, embossed with the royal crest, the wolf's head. It was not a request. It was a summons to the Masque of the Silver Moon, the most exclusive event of the season. For Elise, it was a declaration of war. The gown arrived an hour later, a conspiracy of sapphire silk and silver thread laid out on her bed by a silent Claudette. It was a garment of breathtaking beauty and cunning design, cut to accentuate a form more used to homespun wool. Its color the deep, mysterious blue of a midnight sky just before the stars emerge. With it came a mask, a delicate confection of silver lace and tiny sapphires that would cover only the eyes, leaving the defiant line of her mouth and the telltale mark on her wrist exposed. It was a weapon, and she was to be the one wielding it, whether she wished to or not. "He means to present you," Claudette murmured, her voice devoid of inflection as she helped Elise into the constricting stays and layers of rustling silk, "to throw you to the wolves, if you'll pardon the expression." Elise said nothing, her mind racing. The encounter in the forest had changed everything. The memory of the energy that had passed between them, the look of stunned vulnerability on Adrien's face, was a secret she carried like a live coal in her chest. It was a power, but a fragile one, and to reveal it here, in this den of serpents, would be her undoing. That night, the grand hall of Montclair was transformed. 1,000 candles blazed, their light reflected in a sea of diamonds, pearls, and predatory eyes behind jeweled masks. The air was thick with perfume, intrigue, and the soaring notes of a string quartet. It was a beautiful nightmare. When Elise entered, a hush fell, swift and absolute. She felt the weight of 100 gazes, dissecting her, judging her, coveting the king's favor that her presence implied. She was an exotic bird tossed into a pit of vipers. Then she saw him. Adrien stood at the head of the hall, a figure of devastating authority. He wore no elaborate costume, only a severe black velvet tailcoat, his mask a simple strip of black silk that did nothing to hide the intensity of his gaze. He was the moon around which this gaudy constellation revolved. His eyes found hers instantly across the crowded room, a beacon in the chaos, and he began to move, the sea of courtiers parting before him without a word. He stopped before her, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from his body, to smell the wild, clean scent of him beneath the courtly fragrance. "Mademoiselle Beaumont," he said, his voice a low thrum that vibrated in the marrow of her bones. He did not offer his arm. He simply held out his hand, palm up. A challenge. An invitation. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to flee. But the memory of the forest, of the beast soothed by her touch, held her fast. She placed her hand in his. A jolt, sharper and more profound than before, shot up her arm. His fingers closed around hers, not with the limp grace of a courtier, but with the firm, possessive grip of a man claiming what was his. A soft, collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The king was dancing, and he was dancing with the peasant. He led her into the center of the floor, his other hand settling at the small of her back. It was not a chaste or formal distance. He pulled her close, so close that the silk of her gown whispered against the wool of his coat, so close she could feel the hard, powerful muscles of his body, the controlled, predatory rhythm of his breathing. "You are trembling," he murmured, his breath a warm caress against her temple as they began to move. "Is it fear or is it the cold?" she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "It is the pull of the moon," he said, his voice dropping for her ears alone. "It is in your blood as it is in mine. You feel it, don't you? The call." And she did. As they waltzed, a strange harmony settled between them. Her steps, untutored and rustic, fell naturally into sync with his, as if their bodies were two instruments tuned to the same ancient song. The glittering hall, the staring faces, the music, it all faded into a distant hum. There was only the solid strength of his body guiding hers, the stormy gray of his eyes seeing through the mask, through the silk, down to the very core of her. "Why did you bring me here?" she whispered, her courage fortified by the strange intimacy of the dance. "To humiliate me? To prove a point?" His grip on her hand tightened almost imperceptibly. "I brought you here because I could not bear the thought of you being anywhere else." The raw honesty in his words stole her breath. "They see a curiosity. I see a reflection." The music swelled and he spun her, a dizzying whirl of sapphire silk and candlelight. When he pulled her back, she was closer than before, her body flush against his. Her bare wrist, with its silver mark, brushed against the exposed skin of his neck. It was like striking a flint on steel. A low growl rumbled in Adrien's chest, a sound felt more than heard. His eyes darkened, the pupils dilating, the human receding. The beast was rising, called forth by the proximity of her power, by the intoxicating scent of her fear and her fascination. He dipped his head, his lips hovering just above the sensitive skin of her wrist. The entire court was watching, frozen. "Your Majesty." A smooth, cold voice cut through the tension. Valerius stood beside them, his mask a sinister hawk of gold and ebony. "The Venetian ambassadors are most eager for an audience. You would not wish to keep them waiting on account of a diversion." The spell shattered. Adrien's head snapped up, the beast slamming back behind the mask of the king. The raw hunger in his eyes was replaced by a cold, murderous fury directed at his minister. But the moment was lost. The court began to breathe again, the whisper starting up, louder and more venomous than before. Adrien released her so abruptly she stumbled back a step. "Of course," he said, his voice like shards of ice. He gave Valerius a look that promised a later, more private reckoning, then turned and strode away without a backward glance, leaving Elise alone and exposed in the center of the ballroom. The rest of the night was a blur of sly comments and veiled threats. She was a trophy, a plaything, a witch who had ensnared the king. She endured it, her back straight, her chin held high, the silver mark on her wrist feeling like a brand. Finally, she could take no more and fled to the one place she had found a semblance of peace, The walled herb garden. The cold night air was a blessing. She leaned against the rough stone of the wall, pulling the stifling mask from her face, gulping in the scents of lavender and damp earth. It is a cruel sport, is it not? The court's favorite pastime. The devouring of hope. She whirled around. Adrien stood in the arched entrance of the garden, his own mask gone, his face etched with a weariness that went deeper than bone. The moon, a perfect luminous pearl, cast his sharp features in silver and shadow. "You left me there," she said, the accusation trembling on her lips. "I did." He walked toward her, his steps slow, deliberate. "To have stayed a moment longer, I would have," he trailed off, his gaze dropping to her mouth. Valerius was not wrong to interrupt. "My control is tenuous around you." "Why?" The question was a plea. "Because you are the moon made flesh, Elise," he breathed, now standing so close she could see the flecks of silver in his stormy eyes. "And I am the wolf bound to it. I have fought the beast my entire life. I have caged it, starved it, mastered it. But you make it not want to fight. You make it want to lay its head in your lap and be still." He reached out, his fingers not touching her skin, but hovering just above the silver mark on her wrist. A shimmering visible heat seemed to pulse between his fingertips and her flesh. "What is happening to us?" she whispered, her resolve crumbling. "Fate," he said, the word a final terrifying truth. "A fate written in blood and moonlight long before we were born." This time, when he leaned in, he did not stop. His lips met hers not with the practiced skill of a courtier, but with the desperate, claiming hunger of a man who had been starving in a desert his whole life. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a conflagration. It was the forest and the moon and the wild, untamed thing that lived in both their souls roaring to life at once. Her hands came up, not to push him away, but to clutch at the lapels of his coat, holding on as the world tilted off its axis. When he finally broke away, they were both breathing raggedly. The beast was in his eyes, but it was not the mindless fury of the forest. It was a fierce, possessive, terrifying devotion. "They will try to take you from me," he growled, his forehead resting against hers. "They will use you to break me." "Then do not let them," Elise answered, her voice steady now, certain for the first time since she had arrived. A slow, predatory smile touched his lips, the most genuine expression she had ever seen on his face. It transformed him from a haunted king into something ancient and powerful. "Come," he said, taking her hand. "There is something I must show you. The true hunt." He led her not back into the palace, but deeper into the night, toward the dark, waiting line of the royal forest. The moon, full and heavy, watched their progress, a silent, approving goddess. The game was indeed changing. The pawn had become a queen, and the Wolf King was no longer fighting his curse alone. He led her into the heart of the forest, away from the manicured paths and into a wilderness that felt older than the stone of Montclair itself. The air grew colder, the scent of pine and loam sharp and clean, washing away the cloying perfume of the ballroom. Adrien's grip on her hand was firm, certain, his body moving with an uncanny grace through the tangled undergrowth. He was no longer the constrained monarch. Here he was in his element, a shadow among shadows. "Where are we going?" Elise asked, her voice hushed by the cathedral silence of the woods. "To the source," he replied, his voice a low vibration in the dark. "To the place where my ancestors first pledged themselves to the moon." They reached a clearing dominated by a colossal lightning-blasted oak. At its base, hidden by a curtain of ivy, was an opening, a cave mouth that exhaled an air of deep, ancient cold. Adrien pulled aside the vines. The lupus locus. The wolf's sanctuary. Inside, the darkness was absolute for a moment before her eyes adjusted. The cave was not a rough-hewn hollow, but a chamber of smooth, worn stone, its walls covered in faded paintings. They depicted majestic wolves with pelts of silver and gold, standing beside kings in archaic armor, hunting great stags under full moons, their eyes rendered with chips of obsidian that glittered in the faint light filtering from a fissure in the ceiling. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, and upon it rested a massive leather-bound book, its cover embossed with the same wolf crest Adrien wore. "This is our true history," Adrien said, his voice echoing softly. "The history they would burn if they knew it existed." He opened the book with a reverent hand, revealing pages of intricate script and illustrations. One image showed a woman, her hand outstretched, a crescent moon glowing on her wrist, calming a wolf twice the size of a man. The mark of Selene. It appears in our chronicles only 3 times in 1,000 years. Each time it heralded a great change, a salvation or a schism. He turned to face her, his expression stark in the dim light. "The last time a bearer of the mark appeared, the king, my great-grandsire, had her executed as a witch. He feared her power. His reign ended in madness and blood, the beast consuming him whole." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw, a touch so tender it made her heart ache. "I will not make his mistake. Feel it, Elise, the chaos in my blood. It stills when you are near. You are not my destruction. You are my only hope of salvation." The confession, spoken in this sacred secret place, was more binding than any kiss. The weight of centuries of an entire cursed bloodline settled upon her shoulders. She was not just a healer from a village anymore. She was a pivotal point in the history of a kingdom. Suddenly, Adrien's head snapped up, his body tensing. A low growl rumbled in his chest, the sound entirely animal. "They're here," he snarled. He pulled her deeper into the shadows behind the altar just as torchlight flooded the cave entrance. Valerius stood there, flanked by 4 of the royal guard, their swords drawn. Their faces were hard, their eyes scanning the ancient chamber with a mixture of fear and avarice. "Your Majesty," Valerius called out, his voice slick with false concern. "We saw you leave the mask with the Beaumont girl. We feared for your safety. This place, it is not safe. The old magic here corrupts." Adrien stepped out from behind the altar, his form seeming to swell in the confined space. "You overstep your station, Valerius. This is a sacred place. Leave. Now." "I cannot, sire," Valerius said, his smile a grimace in the flickering light. "Not while you are under the influence of this sorceress. She has bewitched you. Consorting with her in these pagan ruins? The court will see it as proof of the monster they whisper you are." One of the guards, a man with a cruel scar across his cheek, took a step toward the ancient book on the altar. "Evidence of the corruption," he grunted, reaching for it. It was the final provocation. A roar tore from Adrien's throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury that shook the very stones of the cave. He didn't transform, not fully, but the change was upon him. His form seemed to blur at the edges, his muscles coiling with impossible strength, his teeth elongating into fangs. He moved faster than humanly possible, a black streak of fury. He was upon the guard in an instant, batting the sword from his hand as if it were a toy. His own hand, claws now extending from his fingertips, closing around the man's throat. The other guards froze, paralyzed by the primal terror he evoked. "Touch what is mine," Adrien growled, his voice a distorted, guttural rasp, "and you will learn the true meaning of monster." "You see," Valerius shrieked, backing toward the entrance, his face a mask of triumphant horror. "You see the beast. He is lost. Seize the girl. She is the key to controlling him." The remaining guards, spurred by their minister's command, lunged for Elise. "No!" The cry was ripped from her, a surge of protective fury eclipsing her fear. As a guard grabbed her arm, she didn't think. She reacted. She pressed the silver mark on her wrist directly against the bare skin of his hand. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. A silvery light, bright as a shard of the moon, erupted from her mark. The guard screamed, not in pain but in sheer mind-shattering terror. He stumbled back, clutching his hand, his eyes wide with a vision of something so profoundly awful he could not give it voice. He turned and fled, scrambling from the cave like a man possessed. The other guards hesitated, their courage broken. In that moment of stunned silence, Adrien threw back his head and let out a long, piercing howl that ripped through the night. It was a call, a summons. From the depths of the forest, answering howls rose one after another, a chorus of feral power. The remaining guards paled, their weapons shaking in their hands. They looked from their half-transformed king to the woman who wielded moonlight as a weapon, and to the minister who had led them into this nightmare. "This is not over," Valerius hissed, his eyes burning with hatred. He turned and fled into the night, his guards stumbling after him. The cave fell silent once more. The only sounds the ragged panting of Adrien and the distant, fading chorus of wolves. The beast slowly receded from him, the claws retracting, the fangs vanishing, leaving him looking drained, his royal coat torn, his body trembling with the aftershock of rage and power. He looked at Elise, his eyes wide with a new kind of awe. "What did you do to him?" Elise looked down at her wrist, the mark now dull and cool. I don't know. I showed him his fear." She met his gaze, her own filled with a terrifying certainty. "They know Adrien. They all know now." He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel the frantic, wild beat of his heart against her own. "Let them know," he whispered into her hair, his voice raw with emotion. "Let the whole world know. I have spent my life building walls to protect my throne. But you," he pulled back, cupping her face in his hands, his thumb stroking her cheeks. "You are the only thing worth tearing them down for." Outside, the moon shone down on a kingdom balanced on a knife's edge. The silent war was silent no more. The king had chosen his side. And in the heart of the ancient forest, with the scent of wolf and old magic in the air, Elise knew she had chosen hers. She was no longer the healer from the village, or the king's curious pet. She was the woman who held the leash of the Wolf King, and the key to his heart. And she would burn anyone who tried to take him from her. The cave of the Lupus Locust was no longer a sanctuary. It was a war council. In the days that followed the confrontation, a schism tore through the Chateau de Montclair, as clean and brutal as a surgeon's knife. The court fractured. Those loyal to the ancient crown, to the myth of the Wolf King as protector, stood with Adrien. They were a quiet, steadfast group, old military men, provincial lords who remembered the old ways, their loyalty etched not in ambition but in bone-deep tradition. The rest, a glittering, venomous majority swayed by Valerius's silver tongue and promises of a purified France, saw only a monster on the throne and the witch who controlled him. The whispers were now shouts in the corridors. The sidelong glances became open glares. Elise was no longer merely an outsider. She was a symbol of everything they feared and despised. Adrien, however, was transformed. The man who had once worn his solitude like a crown of thorns now moved with a grim, purposeful energy. The beast, having been unleashed in defense of what was his, seemed more integrated. A part of him he no longer fought but commanded. He held court with a new, terrifying candor, his gaze daring anyone to question his authority or the woman who now stood at his right hand, her simple wool gown a stark defiance of their silken disapproval. "They call you my mistress," he said to her one evening in his private study, the fire casting dancing shadows over his face. The room was a fortress of books and maps, a world away from the gilded reception halls. "They think this is about base desire." "And what is it about?" Elise asked, her fingers tracing the silver-marked wrist that now felt less like a curse and more like a shield. He looked at her, the storm in his eyes calm for once, a deep, steady gray. "It is about alignment. You are the only true thing in this palace of lies. You are the compass by which I navigate the darkness." He unrolled a map on his desk, its edges worn soft. "Valerius is making his move. He's rallying the southern lords, whispering of a regency, of a human France. He plans to strike on the night of the next full moon, when the beast in me is at its most potent, and use that as his final proof of my unfitness to rule. Then we must be ready," Elise said, her voice quiet but firm. "We." A faint, weary smile touched his lips. "You said I was your compass," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "A compass does not merely point the way. It ensures you do not lose yourself on the journey." Their preparation was a silent, secret war waged in the shadows. Adrien reached out to his loyalists, his commands dispatched by riders who vanished into the night. Elise, using her knowledge of herbs and the quiet authority she now carried, began to assemble a different kind of arsenal. In the hidden herb garden, she worked alongside the palace's few loyal servants, distilling tinctures of belladonna for sleep, of foxglove for the heart, and creating poultices that could slow bleeding or calm a panicked mind. She was preparing for the aftermath, for the wounds that steel would inflict. The tension coiled tighter with each passing day, a serpent ready to strike. The final night of the waning moon arrived, a sliver of silver in a black velvet sky. The air in the palace was thick enough to choke on. Adrien found Elise on the balcony of his chambers, looking out over the sleeping gardens. The beast was close to the surface. She could feel it in the heightened heat of his body as he came to stand behind her, in the raw energy that crackled around him. "It begins tonight," he said, his voice gravelly. "Valerius's men are massing in the woods to the east. My loyalists hold the western approaches." He rested his hands on her shoulders, his touch both a comfort and a brand. "I must lead the hunt. I must be the wolf they fear, or we will lose everything." She turned within the circle of his arms, her face tilted up to his. The fear was a cold stone in her gut, but her resolve was colder, harder. "Then be the wolf. But remember the man. He is the king. The wolf is merely his weapon." He leaned his forehead against hers, his breath a warm ghost on her lips. "Stay in these chambers. Bar the door. No matter what you hear, do not come out. Adrien. Promise me, Elise." His voice was fierce, desperate. "If they take you, they win. Everything I am, everything I have fought for, it would all be for nothing. You are my heart. If they stop it beating, the beast will consume what is left, and France will burn." The raw vulnerability in his words shattered her. She saw the boy king who had been given a crown of fangs and claws, who had never known a touch that didn't want something from him, until her. She rose on her toes and kissed him, a kiss of promise, of farewell, of a hope so fierce it felt like a weapon. "Come back to me," she whispered against his mouth. He gave a single sharp nod, his eyes blazing with a love as wild and untamed as the forest. Then he was gone, melting into the darkness of the balcony, a shadow leaping into the greater shadow of the night. Elise barred the door as he had commanded, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The silence of the palace was a lie. She could feel the violence gathering, a thunderhead on the horizon. She paced before the fire, her senses stretched taut, listening. Then it came, not from outside, but from within the palace itself. The sound of splintering wood. Shouts. The clash of steel. Valerius had been clever. The attack in the woods was a diversion. His real force was here, inside the chateau, striking at the very heart of the king's power while he was away. A heavy body slammed against the chamber door. The thick wood groaned. Elise backed away, her eyes darting around for a weapon, finding only a heavy silver candlestick. She hefted it, her hands slick with sweat. The door burst open. Valerius stood there, flanked by 4 of his personal guard. His fine clothes were disheveled, his face a mask of frenzied triumph. In his hand, he held not a sword, but a dagger, its blade forged of a dull gray metal. "Silver. The witches alone," he sneered. "The beast is drawn away. It seems the king's heart is left unguarded." "He is more of a king than you will ever be," Elise spat, backing toward the fireplace, the candlestick held before her. "Kings are made by power, my dear, and I hold it now." He advanced, his eyes fixed on her wrist. The mark of Selene. A thing of such power wasted on a peasant. "With you I could control him. I could make the Wolf King my puppet. Or if you prove uncooperative," he raised the silver dagger, "I can simply remove his reason for living." He lunged. Elise swung the candlestick, deflecting the dagger with a shower of sparks. The impact jarred her arm to the shoulder. One of the guards grabbed her from behind, pinning her arms. She fought, kicking, twisting, but his grip was like iron. Valerius smiled, raising the silver blade. "A pity. I would have preferred you alive." A roar shook the very foundations of the room. It was not a human sound. It was the voice of the mountain, of the abyss, of absolute primordial fury. The window behind them exploded inwards. A massive shadow-dark form landed in the center of the room amidst a shower of glass and splintered wood. It was a wolf, but like no wolf ever seen. It was the size of a large horse, its fur the color of ash and shadow, its eyes twin furnaces of molten gold. It was the beast fully unleashed, the king stripped bare of all civility, all restraint. "Adrien." His gaze swept the room, taking in the scene. Elise held captive, Valerius with the silver dagger raised. The beast's lips peeled back from fangs as long as a man's finger. The guard holding Elise screamed and released her, scrambling back. Valerius's face went slack with terror. He thrust the silver dagger forward. "Back, monster! I command you!" The wolf, Adrien, moved with a speed that defied physics. One moment he was across the room, The next his jaws were clamped around the guard's arm, bones crunching. He flung the man aside like a rag doll. The other guards broke, fleeing into the corridor, their courage utterly shattered. Only Valerius remained, backing away, the silver dagger shaking in his hand. Your reign is over. The world will know what you are. The wolf advanced, a low, continuous growl rumbling from its chest, a sound of pure homicidal intent. Its focus was entirely on Valerius, on the man who had threatened its mate. Adrien, no? Elise's voice cut through the bestial rage. She stepped between the advancing wolf and the cowering minister. The wolf stopped, its golden eyes flicking to her, confusion warring with its fury. Not like this, she said, her voice trembling but clear. She looked into the eyes of the beast and saw the man trapped within. If you kill him in cold blood, you become the monster he says you are. The crown cannot be held by fang and claw alone. It must be held by justice. The wolf shuddered, a human agony visible in its animal eyes. The transformation was not smooth. It was a violent, wrenching struggle. Bones cracked and reshaped, fur receded, the massive form shrinking, contorting. In moments, Adrien knelt on the floor, naked, panting, his human form glistening with sweat, his body trembling with the effort of reclaiming himself from the brink. He looked up at Elise, his eyes full of a dazed, overwhelming love. You called me back. Before she could answer, Valerius, seeing his chance, let out a cry of desperation and lunged, the silver dagger aimed at Adrien's exposed back. Elise moved without thought. She threw herself forward, placing her own body between the blade and the king. Time seemed to stop. The silver dagger, meant for the wolf's heart, plunged into the soft flesh of her side. A searing icy pain so different from the fire of Adrien's curse exploded through her. She cried out, stumbling back into Adrien's arms. Valerius stared in horror at what he had done, the dagger falling from his hand with a clatter. Adrien's roar of anguish was entirely human. He caught Elise as she fell, his face a mask of terror. Elise! The world was fading, the pain a white-hot star in her vision. She looked up at his stricken face, at the love and the terror warring in his stormy eyes, and managed a faint smile. I told you, I would not let them take you from me. As her eyes fluttered closed, the last thing she saw was not the beast, nor the king, but the man, her man, howling her name into the uncaring night, his tears falling onto her face, mingling with the blood that seeped from the wound made of silver and betrayal. The world returned in fragments. The scent of dried lavender and beeswax, the rough texture of linen against her skin, the low, steady crackle of a fire, and pain, a deep, throbbing ache in her side, a cold fire that had been banked but not extinguished. Elise opened her eyes. She was in her own chamber, the dawn light filtering through the window, pale and tentative. Adrien was asleep in a chair pulled up to her bedside, his head resting on the mattress beside her hip. One of his hands was wrapped around hers, his grip firm even in sleep. He was still naked from the waist up, a rough blanket thrown over his shoulders. Dried blood, her blood, was smeared across his chest and arms. He looked like a fallen warrior, his regal beauty marred by exhaustion and grief. She stirred, and his eyes snapped open instantly. The storm in them was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate relief that made her breath catch. "You're alive," he breathed, the words a prayer. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch trembling. The physicians, they said the silver, they said they could do nothing, that the poison was in your blood. His voice broke. "I thought I had lost you." "The silver," Elise whispered, her throat dry. She remembered the searing cold, the way it had leached the warmth from her body. She looked down at the bandages swathing her torso. "How?" "You," he said, his gaze filled with awe. "You healed yourself. Or your power did." He gently touched the bandage over her wound. The flesh knit together around the poison, sealing it in. "It's still there, a shard of cold inside you, but you are alive. Your mark." It glowed for hours, a light like liquid moonbeam, fighting the darkness. He bowed his head, his forehead resting against their joined hands. "You could have died. For me. It was my choice," she said softly, her fingers tightening around his. "My freedom." The door opened and a captain of the guard entered, stopping short and bowing deeply. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. The traitor Valerius is in the dungeons. His forces are routed. The loyalists hold the palace and the grounds. The rebellion is broken." Adrien did not look up. "And the casualties?" "Minimal on our side, sire. There will broke when they saw you." The captain's voice held a new profound respect, bordering on fear. "The court awaits your judgment." Finally, Adrien lifted his head. The grief and relief were gone, burned away in the crucible of the night, replaced by a calm, terrifying authority. The boy king was gone forever. In his place was the Alfa, the wolf king, in full possession of his power. "Gather the court in the Hall of Mirrors," he commanded, his voice quiet but absolute. "I will deliver my judgment at noon." The hall was packed, a sea of pale, apprehensive faces. The gaiety of the mask was a distant memory. Now the air was thick with the smell of fear and the aftermath of violence. Adrien entered not in silks, but in the black of mourning, a simple silver circlet on his brow. Elise walked beside him, her steps slow but firm, her arm linked through his. She was pale, her side bandaged tightly beneath a gray gown, but her head was high. Her presence was a statement. She was not his secret nor his shame. She was his equal. They ascended the dais together. Adrien's gaze swept over the assembled nobility, and when he spoke, his voice carried to the farthest corners of the hall, amplified by a power that was no longer entirely human. "Last night you saw the beast," he began, the silence so profound his words seemed to hang in the air. "You saw the fangs and the claws. You saw the monster of your nightmares. And you were afraid." He paused, letting the truth of it settle upon them. "But you should have been more afraid of the men who wielded daggers in the dark. The beast acts on instinct, on the primal law to protect what is his. The men who plotted this treason acted on greed, on ambition, on a cowardice that seeks to destroy what it cannot understand." His eyes found the faces of those who had supported Valerius, and one by one, they flinched and looked away. "My bloodline is not a curse. It is the oldest covenant of France. We are the Lupin, the wolves in the shadows who have kept this land safe while you danced under candlelight. That covenant was almost broken last night. Not by the beast, but by the betrayal of men." He turned slightly, his gaze softening as it fell upon Elise. "This woman, whom you scorned as a peasant and a witch, stood between me and the abyss. She did not see a monster. She saw a man. She did not see a crown to be won. She saw a soul to be saved. She took a blade of silver, meant for my heart, into her own." His voice thickened with emotion. "Her courage shames every one of you." He turned back to the court, his expression hardening into granite. The time for secrets is over. The time for fear is over. I am Adrien de Montclair, the Wolf King of France. This is my queen, my mate, the vessel of the moon goddess. Those who cannot kneel to this truth may leave my court. Those who plot against it. His eyes glowed with a faint golden light. Will answer to the wolf. It was not a threat. It was a promise. A collective shudder went through the hall. Then, one by one, beginning with the loyalists, the entire court knelt. It was not the graceful, practiced curtsy of before. It was an act of submission, of awe, and of a newfound trembling loyalty. The reign of the Alpha King had truly begun. Epilogue. 20 years later, a young historian picked her way through the ivy-choked ruins of the Château de Montclair. The palace had been abandoned for a decade, a beautiful, decaying relic of a bygone era. The great Lupin line had ended, the history books said, with the tragic, childless death of King Adrien. France had moved on, becoming a republic of reason and light, leaving the tales of wolf kings and moon-touched queens to the realm of fairy tales. But the historian, a woman named Celeste, had always been drawn to the mysteries. She pushed open a rusted gate into what had once been the royal herb garden. It was a jungle now, a beautiful wild tangle of unchecked life. And there, in the very center, thriving amidst the neglect, was a rose bush unlike any she had ever seen. Its canes were silver gray, its thorns like tiny daggers, and from it bloomed a single perfect rose. Its petals were the color of moonlight on snow, and they seemed to emit a soft, silvery radiance, as if holding the light of the moon within themselves. Celeste reached out, her breath catching. She did not pick it, but simply brushed the petals with her fingertips. The rose was warm. She looked up at the crumbling palace, at the forest reclaiming its stones, and for a moment she could almost hear it. The echo of a waltz, the whisper of silk, the distant, loving howl of a wolf under a full moon. The historians wrote of kings and queens, of treaties and wars. But as she stood in the warm glow of the silver rose, Celeste knew they had gotten the story wrong. The true story was not one of a curse, but of a choice. Not of a beast, but of a man who learned to love. And of a love so powerful, it had transcended blood, crown, and even death itself, leaving behind only this single impossible bloom, still warm under the moonlight. A promise waiting to be understood. If the howl of the wolf and the touch of moonlight have found a place in your heart, then your journey does not have to end here. The halls of Montclair are vast, and many more secrets wait to be whispered in the dark. Subscribe to the channel and answer the call of the next tale. Let us know you were here by leaving a like, a signal fire in the modern night. And in the comments we invite you to share your mark. Was it Adrien's struggle between the crown and his heart, or Elise's courage to heal a broken king that captivated you? Tell us which moment of primal passion, courtly intrigue, or whispered magic you are still carrying with you. Your voice ensures that stories like this of love, curse, and destiny continue to be told. Until the next hunt begins.